The following program is a production of Ozarks Public Television.
There is a man who took it upon himself to illustrate over 65 pure-blood Indians, representative of their tribes, before it was too late. He was also a world-renowned portrait artist and acclaimed muralist. You will meet this special man, a storyteller, a chronicler of his times. Charles Banks Wilson, from the Ozarks and beyond. Paul Wannenmacher, writer and producer. This special presentation of Charles Banks Wilson, from the Ozarks and beyond, is a gift of Newton County, Missouri, and has been graciously underwritten by employee-owned, customer-driven Community Bank and Trust, serving southwest Missouri and southeast Kansas since 1884. Charles Banks Wilson was born on August 8, 1918, in Springdale, Arkansas, and grew up in Miami, Oklahoma. In 1937, Charles honed his art studying at the Art Institute of Chicago, subsequently living in New York, before returning to his Ozarks and Oklahoma home in Miami.
I think that a great deal of my success is because of my life in the Ozarks. I think that the beauty of the Ozarks, the inspiration of the people, the cooperation, the love I had of people in the Ozarks certainly contributed to my excitement about America. And I feel that where I was able to work supplied me with everything that an artist would need for inspiration. The hills, the landscape, the people inspired me to the point where I didn't feel like I needed to go anyplace else to see America. America was right there.
The Indian tribes of Charles Wilson's world were those in northeast Oklahoma, the furthermost western expanse of the Ozarks. Most of these tribes had immigrated from east of the Mississippi River and had picked up lifestyles from the settlers, including constructing log homes, wearing similar clothing, and use of guns, metal tools, and kettles for cooking. Within northeast Oklahoma, the Indian reservations of the 1930s included the Quapaw, Peoria, Wea, Modoc, Shawnee, Wyandots, Seneca, Miami, Piankashaw, Kaskaskia, Ottawa, and the Cherokees, which first were granted the land by the Treaty of 1829. The emigration to new lands was traumatic. A Quapaw chief was published in the Arkansas Gazette.
This day I beg mercy for us. The whites have shown pity towards us. Do not now withhold it. The land we live on belonged to our forefathers. If we leave it, where shall we go? All of my nation are buried here. Myself am old. In this place wish to leave my bones. Since you have expressed a desire for us to remove, the tears have flowed from my aged eyes. To leave this place of birth and go among Indians alien to our tribe is like throwing us like outcasts upon the world.
These were the Indians of Charles Banks Wilson's world. When Wilson was 19 years old, he studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was his fellow classmates that questioned him about the Indians from his home state of Oklahoma.
I was around Indian people all my life, and I never saw any difference in Indian people than I did in white people. And it wasn't until I went away to Chicago to school and began to be asked by the students, tell us about the Indians, that I really thought, I don't really know that much to tell you. So I found that I just really didn't know that much about Indians and I needed to know more. And so consequently, I think the curiosity of my fellow students encouraged me more to look at my own home and my own background than anything else. I began to realize that Indian people were unique and very interesting. And so I would ask, would you pose for me? And if you posed for me, what would you charge? And normally they would charge 50 cents an hour.
Wilson's studio was above his father's paint and wallpaper store, across the street from the bus station in Miami.
I would make these drawings of those people who were posing for me from the bus station and toss the drawing into a box and gave them no more point because I was just drawing people. I didn't really think I was drawing Indians. I just thought I was drawing good models. But I began to notice that I was filling my box with sketches. I somehow or other had the idea that it was important, and maybe it would be even more important if I painted those people who were pureblood. In other words, their mothers and fathers and grandparents and so forth had had no other tribal entry into their tribe. If, in other words, it was a Quapaw, this particular person had no other tribe in them, and particularly no white blood. They were all of that tribe. In fact, I was down in Lower Oklahoma making a drawing of a man, and some reporter asked me something about, well, if you had nothing else to do in your life, what would you do? And that at the time seemed like a kind of foolish question, but it sunk in, and I thought, well, what would I do? I would try to make a record of those people in America who were all of one tribe. Go to each one of the tribes and say, do you have a pureblood? And make a drawing of him. And that's when I started out on this search across America for the last of the purebloods of the various tribes.
An early illustration by Wilson was of Turkeyfoot, a pureblood Shawnee.
I said, well, I've been out here 3 times to draw you and you're never here. And he said, oh, I was here. I was just out in the bushes. I just wanted to see who it was. And I decided that being as you were an artist, you couldn't do me any harm. So he let me draw him. And I did a watercolor of him. I needed water, and the only water he had was in a tub. And the tub was full of mosquito larvae. So he poured that out, and I painted the watercolor of him using this water and pushing the mosquitoes away to get water for my watercolor. His funeral was held beneath a cottonwood tree in 1943. Indians hung hair from the horse's tail on a tree and a squirrel skin high on a tree to assure him of a good horse to ride and game to hunt in the hereafter.
A fun illustration is of a Comanche lady.
She was the wife of a Comanche man that I had gone to draw. But she was teasing him and giggling so that I asked her if I might draw her also, which I did. And the reason she was holding her hand over her mouth most of the time was because she had no teeth. And she turned out to be the daughter of a very famous Comanche chief.
A great grin was captured by Wilson.
When I got it all through, he came over and looked at the painting or the drawing, and he said, well, Charles, I look like an Indian. And I said, yes, you sure do. For an Irishman, you really look like an Indian.
Then there's Charles Chibity, a Comanche code talker from World War II in the German theater. And here's Joe Benny Mason, an Osage Indian. Note the erect head of Mason. The Osage put emphasis on size, resulting in mothers tying their male child to a headboard to help attain additional height. The pureblood Indian illustrations were donated by Wilson to the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Before the pureblood Indian illustrations and continuous through Wilson's career was his portrait work. At age 15, a young Charles had an opportunity to be backstage with Will Rogers in the Coleman Theater in Miami, Oklahoma.
So many people ask me, what did you think about Will Rogers? And my report was, it wasn't what I thought, it was what did he think of that damn kid?
Wilson's work on Will Rogers continued through his career.
I remember vividly saying that I would like to paint the great picture of Will Rogers. And it so happened that I painted 5 national calendars of Will Rogers. I painted the Will Rogers that's in the Oklahoma Capitol representing the man. I painted Will Rogers as you enter the Will Rogers Memorial in that life-size portrait. And I think that maybe those are the things that I most wanted to do in my life, paint the great picture of Will Rogers. And I almost did it.
Besides